Hey everyone, it's Mike. I'm gonna do another one of these weekly warm-up sketch things, although it's 4:30 and I've been working for a long time, so I guess it's technically not a warm-up, but um I have covers due. So sometimes you take a break from drawing to draw some more. Um so yeah, I've noticed that like when I just call myself do this and I've noticed that when I'm doing warm-ups in the afternoon or like sort of post-work drawings. Um, I don't start nearly as organically, and I hadn't planned on talking about that. I just sort of caught myself doing. When I was in art school, I had a professor that was always adamant about like defining the top and the bottom of your figure. You often see young artists start to draw, and then of course they run out of page, and that's not really something that can fly when you're drawing the figure in a like academic setting. So he would, get us in the habit of like figuring out the parameters so you don't go past them. And then we'd often like start at the middle. About there. Let me check to see if that's about the middle. Yes, it is. Um, and then you had some basis for building your drawing out. The other thing I tend to do when I'm sort of feeling, I think once I've already started work, I'm sort of in that mental space. So I don't need, um, maybe I shouldn't say need, but I'm less fluid because I'm already sort of engaged. And I catch myself being a little more analytical. So I'm doing a type of drawing you'll sometimes hear described as enveloping, like drawing an envelope. So you sort of block in the shapes, right? So I did the top and bottom, and now I'm just sort of using straight lines to build out the figure. And this is a thing that actually carries over to my illustration work quite a bit. Like I start with layouts or thumbnails that are pretty fluid. Like it might be kind of loosey goosey, like something like that. And then when it comes time to do the actual final piece, I'll um I'll break it down with sort of really basic shapes based on that fluid layout, which sometimes you lose a little of the energy, which is a bummer. Um, I think it's why I'm always a little like self conscious about my work getting a little stiff and too controlled. I think that's a downside of being formally trained is that you start picking up habits that carry over to work that maybe those habits aren't the best expression for. Although I guess I shouldn't complain because keep getting work. But yeah, just with straight lines, you can. I mean, you probably can already make out that this is a figure. And sorry for the funny angle. I don't have my normal setup here. Um, but anyway, even with just so straight lines, you can. I mean, you can draw a ball. If you just use straight lines, and if you use enough of them, right? Like so, it's still conducive to an organic shape. You just have to, keep working it. But these straight lines are easier, especially when you're doing figure drawing. Like I'm not doing illustration work at the moment, obviously, but when you're doing things where you want to check and measure, like this is an easier measure. I guess what I mean is like this is easier to measure than this. So you envelope in these figures, and then once everything looks good and everything stands up to some scrutiny with measuring things, then you can start smoothing out the edges, so to speak. And enveloping or this kind of straight edge blocking in is not something I created. This is an old, uh, pretty standard. I mean, you don't see it taught as much anymore in art schools, but this is pretty old stuff. It goes back to there are a series of these plates that were used to train at first printmakers, but then artists called the Bard plates, named after the artist that it was actually two guys that developed the system, but Barg is the one that we used to name the guy, and they teach this pretty. It can be a little rigid, this rigid way of using straight lines to build out figures and forms, and then using them to measure for accuracy. So I've noticed it starting to make a resurgence online where more and more people are talking about the Bard plates as a system of training, which I think is just a response to um, younger artists wanting to like do it the old way and learn like how artists in the past did such incredible um, representational work without any of the technology that new artists tend to lean on. Um, Also, frankly, young artists probably need fewer options. I know it probably sounds counterintuitive, but um, a kid can get their hands on a tablet and draw anything and make infinity mistakes because they can just undo them, and that's fine for developing, I guess, a love for drawing. But frankly, like you need a young student probably shouldn't have the millions of colors at their disposal on a standard tablet and the undo button that is sort of infinite. Um, Not that there's anything wrong with fixing mistakes. I just think that they become dependent on it. Like by the time I get a lot of these kids when they're sophomores, a lot of them become so it's odd. They're almost like weirdly risk averse. They're at a young age when you would expect an artist to be pushing the envelope, trying new things. They're uh they're very frightened of making mistakes. And I think part of it is having, the undo button on their devices that allow them to make mistakes and they instantly fix them. So no one sees them. Where, we would make mistakes and sometimes you wouldn't know until some professor came over and, made you look like a dummy for not seeing what they were seeing. So um, I think young artists are sort of hip to that, and you're seeing a resurgence of these really old techniques for drawing that are known, um, but not like real widely known. I think everybody thinks of drawing as like the sort of feeling your way through it, and I think it's something to that. But classical drawing was more akin to math, right? You could actually like it's either right or wrong. I can look at my model, I can measure this, I can check angles. There's a method, a clock method, where you literally imagine a clock, right, like a standard clock, and then you check angles in comparison to the clock. So I know that's 12, and that's 3. So I can look in the middle and say that's about in between the two, and I can measure that angle. And also, you take those angles through, and then say, look at your figure, and go like, well, that angle ties in through this measurable thing here, right? The section of the calf that I can break up into four parts, and I know it lines up with that. So there's ways to measure all the angles that are, you know, very old techniques that are not often taught unless you're a drawing nerd like me, and I make all my students do it. Um, the other side of that enveloping technique is you'll hear uh, uh, some artists will call it like blocking, where sort of a version of what I'm doing now, where you're still using the straight lines to just block in where your shadows would be. And it's faster than trying to shade it all in. Um, and it's also more accurate. I can just like measuring the contour of the figure, I can like actually measure shadows and angles of shadows. Uh, and again, when you're working with a figure, like you don't have all the time in the world. So sometimes just blocking in the shapes is enough that like I could go in here now and just fill that in and get a sense of form to it. What I like about it is how abstract it is. Because we as artists will often like, I had a professor that would say, like, you're not drawing an eye, you're drawing what you think an eye is, right? So you end up sort of making up what you believe the thing is. And, illustration work, that's fine. Um, Everybody wants to see your personal take on something. And so your idea of an eye can work fine, but when in a formal setting, you know, when you're trying to learn to draw accurately, this stuff matters. So you end up treating the face like a series of abstract shapes versus, uh, facial features. And then before you know it, you have a better likeness than if you're trying to, I'm drawing an eye, I'm drawing a nose, I need to capture that person's nose. When you make it abstract and you're just saying, I just need this angle right, and I need this shape to match what I'm seeing. Once you put those pieces together, it genuinely is like a puzzle. So I don't have to think much about what anything looks like. I just have to make it abstract and just follow the shapes. The other thing I like about these old techniques is that uh, I think, again, to compare it to mathematics, what I see a lot online is it was with art instruction is like a series of art hacks, right? Like everybody's looking for a quick way to draw an eye, or this is the secret to drawing a hand, or here's 12 secrets to drawing the figure. And if you just decide, um, I just need a method of a system, maybe that's a better word, of being able to recreate what I see. If you have an object, even something as simple as a box, um, and I need to recreate that, that's why we draw still lives. Um, the system for drawing this is literally the same as this, right? I can go in and use my clock method to measure out these angles, right? So 12, 9, that's probably 10 o'clock, right? And then you can do complex 3-point perspective without any vanishing points. Um, I would start the same way I started this, right? Like if I'm looking at the block, I decide what is the ratio, so the height to width, or rather usually width to height, right? And those are all measurable things. And that is literally the same as drawing that. So I don't need a hack. How do I draw an arm, a leg? If I can look at the subject matter and I can measure things and use my observation, then I don't need the hacks. I can just know how to draw things. So yeah. Anyway, quick little stupid lesson. It's free, so it doesn't make sense. You get what you pay for. I might do one more and then call it a day because I have a cover to hand in. Let's see. Maybe I'll do a seated figure. Yeah, we'll do something seated. So, um, sort of establish where my top and bottom are. And you can't see, but I'm sort of comparing off camera here the height to width, and looks like it's about 3/4. The height is uh 1 1/4 compared to the width. So if this is the height, maybe I'll do a pencil and then turn it this way and sort of think of this in quarters. Right? I know it's sort of about that. And then from there, I'm gonna envelope it out the big basic shapes. I'm doing this fairly fast. There are ways to sort of measure the point at which these are all hitting, like especially if you're working from a 2D object versus a figure, you have even more space to take measurements of things. Yep. Yep. It's probably going to look very weird at first. I promise something will happen. I should probably add, like, one of the things um, that I have to get through to students. So this semester is about to start, and I teach several classes, but at the main one, I usually only do one semester. Sorry, one class per semester. And this semester's class is um, observational drawing, specifically this kind of stuff. And one of the things that you have to get students to wrap their heads around is that there are different types of drawings, not to say different styles. Like, I'm not talking about individual ways of drawing, of which obviously there's like an infinite number of, for every artist, there's probably a different approach, but to a certain respect, but like, that there is a difference between uh, what we call observational drawing and constructive drawing. And most of what um, you see in, popular culture, how to draw books, they tend to focus more on constructive drawing, meaning a series of, like, again, art hacks of, or techniques. Art hacks makes it sound cheap. Um, Techniques for drawing what you want to draw. Like, here's a like, there's a, like, you might have someone say, here's a simple method for drawing a foot, right? You draw these simple shapes. You think of it as a block and a half wheel, and then maybe there's a wrench holding on to represent the ankle, and then that's fairly easy to build out into a foot, right? So that's constructive drawing. Um, the thing I was describing earlier is sort of having a system of reproducing whatever you see. And that type of drawing is just the observational kind that doesn't rely on a series of techniques, right? I can look at a foot and I can measure this angle. I can measure this angle. I can observe the way that the toes point up. So I don't need to memorize a bunch of random techniques. And I'm not there's definite, like, value to that. I use it all the time in my illustration work. Um, so this is not a knock to, like, constructive techniques, but it's just a different type of drawing. And in my opinion, like, if you're going to go to art school, like, you should know the difference and you should know how to do both, frankly. So now the the constructive stuff can even carry over to, knowledge of anatomy. Like, when I was in school, we had to measure all the muscle groups and canons of proportions and all that stuff. And so, um, with observational drawing, like, you don't necessarily, I don't need to know what muscles are in here. Um, I do think, though, that it helps inform. Like, I can look at a figure and say, like, I understand why a certain shape or form looks the way it does or is changing as it moves the way it does because of knowing the anatomy. But you don't have to know the anatomy if you're using these old school kind of observational drawing techniques. I think, like, whenever I talk to, let's call them civilians, right, non-artists, and that's not meant to be derogatory, but, like, I always end up in rooms with, like, engineers and lawyers and stuff like that. And when you tell them, when they find out you're an artist, they always have, like, a couple of, like, silly points of reference. It's almost always um, Van Gogh with the ear, of course, and then Da Vinci and the mythologizing of, like, drawing from cadavers. And I'm not saying that we haven't benefited from that. Frankly, like, um, there's a lot of anatomical information out there that you'll see in books that, and you can tell when, um, I don't want to say it's been made up, but we just don't understand. The one good example is you don't see it in art schools so much anymore, but there's a sculpture of the flayed man. It's this statue, one arm sticking out, Um, and he's supposed to look as if his skin has been flayed off. And it was used forever to train artists on anatomy, like doing these le crochet sessions in art schools. And frankly, there are actual anatomical mistakes on that sculpture, and you don't know that, right? Unless you have someone who has looked at the actual anatomy and said, "Hey, this is not correct." So I'm not saying we don't benefit from artists that were like willing to do stuff like working from cadavers, but I think we no longer need that. And it's silly to sort of think that you got to sit and draw from a like the way Da Vinci did, to be some sort of a true artist. Um, but as a person that actually has taught anatomy and still does from time to time in a college setting, I definitely think it's worth the time. You don't have to be a nerd like me and sort of memorize. I'm old enough to have like had to memorize the Latin terms, which is even worse. Um, but uh, I think most kids just know constructive anatomy, and if they could combine that with observational anatomy, or rather constructive drawing and observational drawing, um, it's the best of both worlds. And I also just feel like if you're going through the trouble of being educated, then you ought to know all of it. So I guess I should look at the chat here. Hey Aaron, on years, wondering if I do folio or project reviews. I have not, outside of my classroom, just because time. Like I have done them in the past with clients. Like I taught some lessons for like folks at Proco. If you don't know about Proco, it's run by this guy Stan Prokopenko, who runs an exceptional online art school. So if I do any portfolio reviews, it tends to be in a setting like that. Um, but if that changes, this will be the place where I'll announce it. So I guess stay tuned. I would love to just open it up, but like my schedule at the moment is a little off the wall. Um, but yeah, I'll let you know. All right. So with that, I think I'm done. I should probably get back to my actual paying work. I have a cover due. So anyway, I hope this was instructive and helpful. Thanks for hanging out. I am doing this in place of my normal weekly newsletter, which I've been experimenting with drawing instead of writing, just because I enjoy that. Um, so if you dig it, subscribe. That's it. All right. Thanks, guys.